or this film was a perfect example of that. I want to get the filmmakers up here. I'll grab you guys some chairs real quick.
Just one filmmaker.
One filmmaker? All right. One filmmaker, and we'll have the moderator as well. I want to introduce you guys to the moderator, Michael Hess. Michael Hess is a doctor and a professor at the University of New Mexico. He is all around a very smart person, but he is also, if you guys want to check this out, he is on a KUNM Global Music Show on the first Monday of every month. So if you guys want to hear more of him, please check that out. And without further ado, Michael Hess.
Thank you, everybody. I'd like to call our filmmaker up, Mr. Soren Sorensen.
Hello.
And if you could just introduce yourself to the audience a little bit more.
I'm Soren Sorensen. I'm from the northeast. I come from Rhode Island, so I'm a long way from home. But I'm really glad to be here in Albuquerque. I've had a great time.
Great, we're glad you came. I'm going to start this off by probably the question that you get most often, and that is, you've made a lot of documentaries of various topics, including breast cancer, an organization that supports breast cancer, people who have breast cancer, and one about explores dementia, and one about your father's experiences in Vietnam. So really varied documentaries. So what drew you to Omar Sosa as a topic?
Well, I was writing for a really short-lived arts and culture magazine called Tribe in Providence, Rhode Island, and the editor-in-chief of Tribe magazine, Tony Aguilar, gave me a stack of CDs. Some of them were, I was writing and editing for him, and some of them were just CDRs and earned CDs and things like that. And one of them was Omar Sosa, and I honestly, embarrassingly, don't even remember which CD it was. But it was, kind of, it just spoke to me, and I honestly don't even know what the reason was. I hadn't heard of it before, and this was in 2010-ish or something like that. And so I contacted Scott Price, who's Omar's longtime manager since the mid-90s. And I just through like the website, just as easy as that. And he put me in touch with Omar for a Skype conversation. We did a Q&A for Tribe magazine back then, and we talked for about an hour. And he didn't have to give me an hour of his time. You know how these things go. He could have talked to me for 20 minutes and it would have been fine. I wouldn't make a story out of it. But so it kind of really started there, and because he's so sort of warm and giving of his time, and he has such a fascinating backstory, not even half of it got into that conversation. These are extensive interviews that we did over the course of multiple years. We're coming up that scene where Paolo Fresu is circular breathing that one note for many minutes in the South Orange Performing Arts Center. That was 10 years ago in February. That was 2013. So when I asked him if I could make a film about his life, that was probably 2012, 2013, and we had lunch and then discussed it. And then basically any time he was in the Northeast, he let me film him, and we'd sit down and have a long interview, and we'd shoot the concert and whatever. So so it was like this. There was this kind of, when you make a documentary, you want to have a good character, just like when you're making a narrative film, and he's a good character. I mean, it's as simple as that. And also, he collaborates with all these fabulous people who are, just as he'd say, just as good as he is. They're just pretty unbelievable, the collection of people that he collaborates with.
Yeah, that's something that really struck me and stands out in the film is Omar Sosa's collaborations with so many people. And it seems to me that I'm wondering if that made it easy for you to not only work with Omar Sosa because of that collaborative spirit, but also to find the people who are going to basically be in this and offer their testimony about Omar Sosa and their experiences working with him.
Yeah, I would be lying to you if I said it was easy because it took me 10 years. So, I mean, nobody makes a film over this long a period of time probably thinks it's easy. It was one of those things where it's like you have this embarrassment of riches. So it was like so much stuff. Scott had shipped me 2 or 3 boxes to my home in Providence at the time. It was a condo, and it was all different media you can imagine. Like it was mini discs, and it was like high 8, and then there was VHS, and there were CDs and DVDs and all kinds of weird stuff that Scott didn't even know was on it. And I began the process of getting those things all transferred into just files that I could use and bring into my editing software. But yeah, it was like, it's really, I mean, really that editing process is difficult because you are cutting down from like, you know, hours and hours and hours and hours of just archival material, let alone the long conversations that I had with, you know, him and his collaborators. And in fact, that interview with Chucho Valdez, the legendary Chucho Valdez, that was done just like, you know, like, I'm trying to remember, what is it, 2022? That was done in like late 2021, I guess, like kind of one of those like lulls in COVID. I'm trying to remember exactly when we were there. It's escaping me, but that was actually relatively recent, that conversation with Chucho Valdez. And in fact, Omar got so excited about the film when he saw it, he started suggesting other people for me to interview. So it may well be that there are 2 or 3 other interview subjects by the time this is out on streaming. I wouldn't be surprised.
You talked about having to basically go through hours and hours and hours of film stuff that you shot. Were there things that you left out that you would really like to keep in the film but just couldn't?
Yeah, that's, you know, I was just thinking about that while I was watching. I actually sat through the whole film, which is pretty rare, but it was great. It's nice to do when you can stand it, but when you've been with the material for so long, maybe the inverse is true, where you're kind of looking for things to take out still, as in the editing process. There are so many things that made it in that I guess there are just these. I mean, there were at some point in 2017 when he was making the album Ile, which I really like. It's his quarteto Afro-Cubano, where you see everybody in there. I wish there was more of them in there because we were in the studio while they were cutting that record, and that didn't make it in. And you know, there are more interviews with Shildo Tomas from Mozambique and Leandro St. Hill, who's from Camagüey, Cuba as well. There's a lot more with them that just didn't make it in based on. I mean, this guy Omar works so fast. Like I made one film in 10 years, like he made 10 records in 10 years. Like he puts out 1 or 2 a year. You know, it's just kind of, you know, irksome how prolific he is. And you'd think that it would be a difficult marriage between us because he's so prolific and I'm so not prolific. But he, you know, it worked out pretty well. So yeah, I wish there was more of the quarteto Afro-Cubano in there. I think Ernesto Simpson is one of the best drummers alive. All 4 of them are just great together. And he's actually at Dizzy's right now with his new quarteto Americano with Peter Applebaum and Josh Jones from the Bay Area. So and he's at Dizzy's in New York City right now. Or else he'd be here. But yeah, so I wish there was more of that band in there, I think, because we got so much of that material.
So I'm one who really likes a lot of allegory, and you chose to kind of parallel Omar's story with the fable of Alegua. And I'm wondering, was that something that was organic, that you started out with that idea in mind, or did that develop as you were making the film?
Yeah, I love that you asked that because it's absolutely not something I started out with. That is a thing that came really late in the editing process, where I knew that some of these short segments were feeling like they were a little disjointed or not related to one another. Or this one had archival footage, and this one was something we shot, and this was something we shot, but we shot it with different cameras. This is a different band configuration, and where is he now, and when is he now, and all that kind of stuff. And so I knew that I wanted to bounce back and forth in a pretty conventional way between his biography, his early life, and emergence as a solo artist, and present day, essentially, which is impossible to capture, because as I told you, he's premiering a new quartet like literally this week in New York. So where he's been working with this quarteto Americano for not that long, actually, in its current configuration. So the Alegua, I'm trying to remember what record it is, but inside the CD of one of his, it might be Spirit of the Roots or something, but Scott had translated Omar's manager had translated, and it's in English and Spanish, this story of Alegua in very, very simple terms. You use the word fable. I mean, it's like this. It's very easy to read. It only takes a couple of minutes to read. But I thought threading that through the film was better than me trying to give anybody a history lesson as somebody that doesn't know much about Santeria. And I didn't. There's not a ton about like Omar's religious practice in the film. I mean, at the top of it, he introduces it, and you see little bits and pieces of it. But I wanted to keep that aspect of his career or his emergence again as an artist and as a person, right there, in the audience's consciousness. So I thought that was the way to do it without me lecturing anybody, but also you could get a little bit of a sense of what that story is and how it relates to him and how he leads his life.
Yeah, it seems there's also a little bit of Eshu in there, which is Eshu is kind of the flip side, the mirror side of Alegua. So there's a little bit more chaos, and there's a little bit more. He's kind of the bad boy as compared to Alegua, and so it seems like you captured a little bit of that too in some of the hardships of Omar's story.
Yeah.
I was really struck by how you were able to draw Omar out, because he seemed a little bit reluctant when he was talking about his own hardships, especially about his own health problems and about the death of his friend.
Yeah, well, the construction of the segment that talks about Angola, and then it talks about, it actually talks about him collaborating with Tim Erickson. I go into a little bit of the history of the slave breeding industry, essentially. That segment after that, where he says he's lucky, he says I'm lucky, I'm very lucky. He doesn't complain a lot. Like, I interviewed him for hours and hours and hours, and it wasn't like him like griping about stuff. So by that point, I was like, tell me some negative story. Like, it was just I was like, what were hard things, like really hard things that happened? And he has to laugh. I mean, he's very buoyant, and that's another reason why Eshu is less prevalent, and the darkness is less prevalent, and it's more like a mischievous kid, because he is constantly laughing and he's constantly dancing and kind of very cheerful and buoyant. And I was interviewing him in some times where he hadn't slept and he had been missed flights and all kinds of stuff, but he cut out the time for me. And I have images of him just like exhausted, but he wanted to do it, and he believed in what I was doing, and he was willing to spend the time to do it. So yeah, but I was at that point, I was like a tacky journalist saying like, well, tell me some negative things about your life so I can use it in the film. It's like I was sort of at a loss. I mean, we'd become very friendly, so it was easy for me to ask him about it. And about the heart thing, that really happened where it was like myself and his manager were kind of going back and forth. Like the manager, Scott, was like, we don't have to do that. Scott's thinking like he has to insure him to travel and all this stuff. And Omar's like, let's talk about it. We'll cut it out if we don't like it. Because they're very much my partners in this film, which I don't find to be ethically challenging at all. Like I want this to be like an arm of him. I want him to help tell this story, and it really is mostly his voice that comes through. So if he doesn't like it, what the hell am I doing? I guess.
I was also struck by the animation that you put in there to illustrate, it seemed, parts of Omar's story. And I guess a similar question is, was that something you envisioned at the start, or is that something that also developed as you shot the film?
Yeah, that was something I envisioned at the start for a really simple reason, which is that there isn't footage of him in Angola, not even a single still image, or even like a lot of images of him in high school. Early childhood, there are those sort of baby pictures and early childhood pictures and pictures as a teenager, but there's nothing of him like in conservatory except for that one shot of his, and I think it was like a final exam where he's playing the marimba, and it's like, what am I going to do here? Like, he's telling these stories, and I can see what he's talking about, and I find it to be compelling, but I need to like make sure the audience feels that as well. So yeah, I found an animation studio in Pawtucket, Rhode Island, of all places, and it was also, the other thing that was really important to me in terms of a white filmmaker, myself, telling a story about a black, a Cuban person, or person of color in general. Like, I wanted the animation company to be, owned and operated possibly by people of color, if I could, and I actually found one literally one town over from me, Floating Pear Productions, because it meant a lot to me that the way that this character was designed wasn't like my hand or a white person's hand. Like, I wanted to make sure that this was like this wouldn't ring as being like, oh, this person's just like, playing games or creating this identity that doesn't exist. So, but the main thing again about it was that I wanted Omar to like it. So he liked it, and I was like, all right, we're good. It was like if he was inspired by it, he thought it was cool, and he didn't have a lot of issues with it or notes or anything like that. And so, yeah, having the animation in it was something I liked. I wanted to do right away. Animation is extremely expensive and time consuming too. So I started out thinking I only needed a couple minutes and ended up being twice as much, twice as long. So it's a difficult process, especially when you've never done it before. But they were great, and everybody seems to like it. So yeah.
Does shooting concert footage or music documentary, is that something that you've done before, and does it present unique challenges that you hadn't faced in the other?
Yeah, no, I've never done it before. I'm just like a massive fan of music documentaries. I'll watch a music documentary about an artist I've never even listened to, and maybe I'll never listen to them, again. I watched like the Machine Gun Kelly documentary that's on Netflix or Hulu right now. Like every music documentary that comes out, I want to watch it regardless of how I feel about the artist. If I have preconceived notions, or I like hearing stories about artists, whether it's visual artists but I went to Berkeley for my undergrad, so. I'm certainly not as good as Omar Sosa is, but I trained as a musician, and so a lot of the stuff that he was talking about, moving him when he was younger, kind of fusion and things like that, I was discovering that stuff when I was the same age as him, but years after the fact, in the 90s when I was in college.
It seemed like you raised a lot of money for the film through crowdsourcing. Did you find any other funding to help you out, or was it all through that medium?
It was mostly through crowdsourcing, like the money that we raised through Kickstarter, and then a lot of it was just because, like, I'm careful to tell people that I'm a teacher. Like, I teach at Clark University in Worcester, and I teach filmmaking, and I'm an associate teaching professor there, and so that's my job. And so, like, they've been incredibly supportive. Like, they've screened the film, and I've gotten grants for different kinds of finishing the animation. I got a decent grant from them, and so it was a lot of kind of like self-funding plus crowdfunding, but not tons of different funding sources. I worked with a director of photography named Jason Rossi, who basically did this for free for me. I bought him lunch and hotels, and paid for gas and stuff like that. But like, this guy was just like, let's go do it. Who cares? Like, get in the car, we'll go do it. So if we had something, then I had another friend, Jay Hyman. But basically, every camera operator in this did it without pay. They knew that I wasn't making any money off of it. It was just a passion project, and it was taking 100 years, and they were just helping me out. The interview with John Santos that takes place at his home in Oakland, I wasn't even there. Like, Scott got another camera operator that they know to go to John's house. They set up FaceTime. I talked to John for FaceTime, and he did the interview to another person's face, because why not? And it works out great. You don't know that it wasn't there. So I got lucky with a lot of friends who I will probably pay next time.
I'm assuming then that raising money that way might give you a little more freedom as a filmmaker to do what you want.
You think that, and then you say you're going to deliver the film in 2018, and it's like 2022, and you haven't delivered the film to anybody yet. I didn't feel, honestly, I didn't feel any, like, I had all the freedom in the world to do this. So nothing that you see on the screen is like the result of compromise. There was a lot of, like, I had a really great editor, a consulting editor, Chad Fredericks, who I haven't even met in person. We've just corresponded over email, and he's given me like 100 rounds of notes on the film. So a lot of what you see there is like me. He's like, okay, help me, like help me make this shorter, and kind of like shaving stuff down. It's always good to get notes from as many people as you can.
Great, thank you. I'd like to open some questions for you in the audience, if anybody is interested. I can barely see anybody out there, but I see you over there, sir. There's a mic coming to you. And if you can...
I could have just yelled this whole time, really easy.
You can go ahead and state your question.
Thanks. When the portion of the film happened where he said, I need to leave Cuba. Cuba doesn't have anything for me anymore. I was reminded of the famous story that when Iri Carey was touring in the United States, Paquito de Rivera and Arturo Sandoval defected. And I wondered, you don't go into it, how did he get out of Cuba?
It's not, it's really not that
It's
exciting.
lessened up, it's
Well, there's so much about that I wanted to know, and I was like, this has got to be like a spy thriller or something. And it's not. You know, he was a working musician, and part of the life of a working musician was traveling internationally. But he was also, and you catch it, he says it, it was basically an aside, but he says his second wife is from Ecuador, and so they moved to Ecuador with her, but he didn't have any trouble getting out of the country or anything like that. Cuba's a strange presence in these artists' lives. Like when I interviewed all of them and asked them about it, it's like this. There's a magic to it, and there's this kind of like, that's where I came from, and I'm proud of it, and it like formed who I am. And the training was like world class and all this kind of stuff. But also, I have to get out of there, or else there's something that's going to squash what I'm doing by staying. And that's true of any home. It's nothing against Cuba necessarily. That's true of staying in your hometown if you're from Connecticut, like I was, right? So like if you grow up in a certain place, like if you have a mind like Omar's, you have to leave. Like he isn't just like full of wanderlust and just wants to always collaborate with all these different musicians. So yeah, the truth is there wasn't much of an exciting story there or anything like that. He's been free to travel back and forth to there. What's really fascinating to me, and I pitched this as a sort of end of the film to him, is he hasn't performed there since the 90s, like officially. Like he has not performed in public there since the 90s. So they always kind of try to get him to perform at the Havana Jazz Festival, and always says, well, they're not paying me enough or something. Whatever. There's always some idea, but he's got a great life. He doesn't really need to, he doesn't need to be there and stuff. But I know he's spending more time there, and I hope that he performs there, and I hope I can go when he does, because I think it'll be really special. Because it's a special place to him, and it's a special place to all music, whether you know it or not. Ned Sublett, the author who wrote Cuba and its music, and who wrote this extensive book about the slave breeding industry. He's this incredible scholar and historian. I spent a long time with him at the Blue Note. He talked about in the Rolling Stones Satisfaction, and he said, in Rolling Stones Satisfaction, it goes, hey, 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 right? That's 1, 2, cha, 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 1, 2, cha. I mean, we don't think about how much Latin music influences early rock and roll. We just don't. I don't think people realize there's this kind of wall between that. And I think, for Omar, this stuff is all just fluid. He sees it the way other people don't. Does that answer your question? Sorry.
Yeah.
Kind of verbose.
Someone was a punk musician.
What's that?
And someone was a punk musician.
That's all. Yes, he was. Yeah. And he continues to make music. But he's an incredible author. Historian. So,
Any other questions?
Yes, sir.
First of all, it's a fabulous film. I
Thanks.
enjoyed it tremendously.
Thank you so much.
I really appreciate you doing that. With so much material, and you talked about a little bit, all these different medias that you were being inundated with, how did you come to a point where you start to be able to contextualize this in such a way that you can tell this story? It just seems incredible to me that you had so much, and how do you get it down to a point where you put it into an hour and a half film?
Yeah, I don't know. It was so long ago. Honestly, what you start with, or what I start with, is what the thing that I'm most interested in. When I first did an MA degree at Rhode Island College, and my faculty advisor there, Russell Potter, was basically and I had designs that I was going to get a PhD, or I had this idea that I was going to go do research about this and that. And I'm glad that I didn't do that, because I don't think I could have hacked that. But he taught me, when you're reading some dense theoretical text or something, to read nomadically. and you just pick up what you can carry, and you don't think that it's gonna break your brain open. You're like, well, I understand Deleuze and Guattari now, or I understand Georges Bataille, or I understand Roland Barthes, or any of this stuff. Like, you read it, and you're just like, if you don't get it, like, just find a phrase that you like. He was this is a brilliant guy, Russell Potter is. He's published on a number of subjects. But that kind of really reoriented the way I thought about storytelling, the way I thought about like making art. In fact, that you don't have to. A lot of it is just behavior. It's not identity. Like it took me a long time to say I am an artist, right? It was like, but I'm actually doing this, and I need to figure out how to do it. So I started with the things like Omar's a nomad, right? Like I'm gonna make this story nomadically, even though I'm sitting in New England. I mean, he's traveling around the world like a comet. But he, he'll tell a story like that story about the salsa jingle in Ecuador, and I knew that had to go in. Like that's just like priceless. Like that boils down to what it's like to be a commercial artist versus an artist for yourself, or trying to make music that really speaks to you or speaks to your passions. And like when Paulo Freire circles and does that long circular breathing, I mean, that was the first shoot. That was the shoot that we did in February of 2013 at the South Orange Performing Arts Center in New Jersey. And I showed that to a friend of mine not long after that, after I cut it together. There were 100 different iterations, but I showed it to a good friend of mine, another filmmaker, Derek Dubois. And he said, we were watching it, we were screening it for somebody, and he said, you have to put this whole thing in the film, right? I was like, yeah. I was like, yes, there's a 5-minute segment I gotta put, so they're like, you just kind of have to sort of get glued to stuff and stuff that really, really excites you, and then you just kind of peg those up and you do a paper cut and try to figure out, okay, I know I gotta get from here to there, how do I do it? And this Legua was one way to kind of thread the needle and get these things together. When I first screened this stuff for Omar, he was really impressed with it, but he was like, this is all just like, you have to glue this together. Like, these are all these great little pieces, but it needs to have some connective tissue. And he's not a filmmaker, but he was absolutely right. Like that was how it felt, and it kind of, in a way, still feels like that, but it feels a lot more it feels a lot more purposeful now than it did, or intentional than it did.
Any other questions? Yes, a second first.
I don't have a question, I have a comment though. I thought the opening of the film was absolutely wonderful.
Thanks.
And Omar is the bearer of light. I mean, how did that come to you?
I mean, again, so Jay Hyman, who's a filmmaker friend of mine, who lives in Crown Heights, Brooklyn, he was there on that day. That was backstage in 2013 at the South Orange Performing Arts Center in New Jersey. One of my best friends from school lives in South Orange now, so I drive past it like every time I go visit it. It's wild. I haven't been back there since then. And it's Jay Hyman was. I was in the mezzanine of the auditorium, and my other Jason Rossi, who shot most of this, was in the back of the orchestra section. Not that big a place. We had long lenses and stuff. And then Jay Hyman was like, "Well, I'll handhold the camera and I'll follow them to the stage." And so he was always doing that. He was like, "Let's just shoot everything we can get." And I was like, "Okay." You're always taking advice from somebody that's senior and has done this a little bit more. And he was just backstage with them while they were waiting to go on, and kind of just let the camera sit on the candle, and Omar like warming his hand and doing that stuff. All that is kind of, he even says in the film, it's not like a religious ceremony, a lot of that is, there's practicality to it. He's actually warming his hand up, and he pulls that, he takes that candle on stage with him everywhere he goes, and if they don't allow candles, he actually brings a fake, like a little battery powered one. It's part of the ritual, part of the routine that he does with the little statuette and that scarf, that kind of piece of fabric there. And for him to explain that, I also had so much footage of him coming out on stage with it and then leaving stages with it that I just wanted to kind of like cut him doing that stuff to a piece of music that he wasn't really playing. Most of his concerts begin with some piece like this, some kind of meditative, kind of slow, just to kind of get you into the mood and kind of you know where you are, when he starts doing that and playing like that. That you're not. This isn't like a jazz concert that he's going to play, the Days of Wine and Roses or something. Like that's not happening at this show. So yeah, I knew that was a really early cut. You kind of start sometimes, or I kind of start sometimes doing chronological order. What's the opening of the film? And that's what that was.
Let's take one more question and then we can wrap it up.
Hi, Carrie.
I don't know who's gonna ask.
How about 2 more questions?
We'll take 2 more questions.
Well, beautiful film.
Thanks.
First of all, I love it. Definitely gave me a new perspective about music and stuff.
Thank you.
Never heard about Cuban music, but I just want to give us some insight about some motivations, because you said it was about 10 years, right, for making this film, this project.
Yeah.
And you just see a little motivation. Was there any challenges, heavy challenges? Was there times where you almost felt like giving up, or was there times where you were like, this, I have to tell the story. This is just.
We don't have time for it to go into how many times I wanted to give up. I thought, I mean, it wasn't even giving up. I just thought I couldn't do it at some times. It had been so long. So it was kind of, but I mean, COVID was a huge one. I was really close to this when COVID happened, and then it was like, all right, I got 2 kids, and I have to figure stuff out like everybody else. And so that was a big chunk of time, obviously, for everybody, where everybody had a challenge. Omar and I, he premiered the film, he performed in Albuquerque last in April, and we premiered the film right after that in Dallas, Texas. And Omar was able to sit with me and watch the film. It's the only time we've ever done that, like this version, like basically finished film. We've had times where he was like, when's it going to be done? And he kind of tuned out from it because he's just like, we've been working on this for too long, like I don't think this is going anywhere kind of thing. And like, I don't think there was any notion of him being like, well, I'm walking away from this, or I'm taking the footage, or something, anything like that. It was more like Scott would be like, well, Omar's asking, Scott's so nice and so kind, and so, and I think Omar is also so nice and so kind, but we're both artists and we kind of butt heads a little bit, and even though he's more prolific than I am, he's really happy with the way it turned out, and I think like there have been times where he was like, what's taking so long? And I don't blame him for that, because he's like, look, I've made 20 records in this time. Like, what's wrong with you? These things do take time. And I mean, Scott, bless him, he would send me emails every time a jazz documentary was released to be like, hey, look at this. I just showing you, this is coming out. Here's another one. Here's one about Roland Kirk. Here's one about this guy and Buster Williams. And here's this guy. And I was like, oh man, I know. Like, here's the one about Miles Davis. And this one about Coltrane's on Netflix. I'm like, all right, take it easy. I'm doing my best. I'm one person. But yeah, so the challenge was the time itself. So yeah, that was really a challenge for sure.
We have one more question.
My friend Carrie.
So, my question is, it's a wonderful film.
Thanks.
Thank you so much.
So is yours.
So my question is, the subtitles, like, I love the beauty of not having subtitles. But,
Subtitle the whole thing.
there are moments where the accent I personally could not decipher or understand.
Totally
So it's like,
yeah.
when or how do you know when to put it in for the audience?
Honestly, I kind of am like, I weirdly feel like it's all or nothing. Like I subtitled the beginning of it, and then I kind of just left it out, and then I subtitled in Spanish, and then I'm thinking, okay, I should just subtitle everything for at least Omar that's in English, because it's heavily accented, and I'm cutting a lot and all that kind of stuff. And if you don't see his lips moving, then it changes everything. It's like wearing a mask. It just changes everything the way that you perceive it. So I think, like, though I'm kind of on the fence, I don't think I've been to one screening where somebody says, you should subtitle the whole thing. I mean, it's like, and most people are used to, watching films at home now with closed captioning on. And while sometimes closed captioning can be kind of garbage, and it tells you what kind of music is playing and stuff, and it's like, that's not good, that's not working, and there's like errors throughout, and the lyrics are wrong, all kinds of stuff. But if I can control what the subtitling was, and he approved it and was happy about it, he also doesn't, he's very self-conscious about his English, like to a humorous point, and I find his English to be perfect. So we kind of don't see, like, I'm just like, I understood everything you said, like, don't be self-conscious about it, but I agree, it's accented, and again, he was heavily fatigued oftentimes when I was interviewing him, it was right before he went on or whatever, so yeah, I think it's a good idea for sure. Thanks.
All right, we'll wrap this up. I just have one more question. Do you have any other projects? Any other projects in development?
I'm 47 right now. When I'm 57, I'm going to release another feature length. And it takes place like during the Civil War era, so I don't have to like worry about chasing down archival footage or anything like that. It's going to be very, I'm going backwards into dusty old Ken Burns territory.
Well, thank you very much, Soren, for coming. And
Thank you guys.